Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to a brand new video of Fox Fix on Popcross Studios. Today we're checking out episode 6 of the Trismegistus Story Academy, Academy storyline, whatever you want to call it. Today's episode is Monstrosity's Mesozoic Melee. Now that's a lot of alliteration. Let's hop in and check it out.
Previously on the Trismegistus Academy, Jake Tajin and the rest of the Maverick class at the Trismegistus Academy for Heroic Enlightenment are working on a plan to take down the cruel headmistress of the Ludum Academy for Fearsome Fighters, Eloise Ludum. Some of her own students have even gotten on board in secret to help taking her down. But, while coming up with this plan, they also have to carry on with their schoolwork and training as usual. Jake and the other 6 students in his class have finally started their first day in the famously difficult Resilience Combat Training class, run by Professor Strone Goggins. Most teachers at the school are very warm and relaxed. But not this guy. He may not force them into life-threatening situations the way Ludum does with her students, but he is there to help ensure that the students push themselves well beyond their own perceived limitations.
Yeah, they gotta push it to the limit. I'm sorry.
On their first day of class, the Mavericks were taught to remember that their mind quits before their body does, and to take that mentality into a trial, where they all had 4 hours to race to the end of a long beach while being blocked by simulated creatures called gleams that were specifically programmed to counter their own superhuman abilities and gifts. Jake nearly gave up many times, but ended up being pushed by seeing that the rest of his class needed inspiration and help. He and fellow student Anna Fens eventually worked together to get right near the end. At the last minute, Jake was—
Hey, look at that! He's actually going with the new art style he tried out in the last week's episode. Or the video, whatever you want to say. But hey, I'm glad to see that he's going on with this. Nice!
Caught but hurled Anna across the finish line, helping prove to the rest of the class that it was possible to finish. Now, let's see if any more of them can get to the end before the class is over. In Chapter 6 of the Trismegistus Academy.
Let's do this.
Seeing Anna Fens waving from the finish line of the Resilience Combat Trial lit a fire under Amelia. Amelia, or Monstrosity as she liked to be called, had just been dragged through the water.
Oh, that's the monstrosity of the title.
Back to the starting line for the 40th time, and her body was still freezing. She wasn't sure if she could bring herself to go back in the water again moments before, but seeing Anna reach the end had changed that. Amelia could just barely see her own icy gleam foe, called the Gleam Pagos, teleported back to the opposite end of the beach, pacing near the water's edge, waiting for her to dive in again.
Okay.
Amelia looked down at her feet. Both were converted into her freak form, as she called it. Maybe she could push that a little farther, she thought. She allowed her hands and arms to shift partway as well, becoming more muscular and scaly green. The crystal that jutted from the back of her hand grew and overtook her full right hand as well. As soon as she pushed her—
That explains what's going on with the little image. I was wondering about that.
Powers further, she could feel the urge to destroy everything she saw taking hold, but she resisted its will.
That's why
she may not be able to control herself while fully transformed yet, but in this partially altered state, she felt like she could hold on, as long as she had an important task to focus on. She dove back into the water. Ice chunks floated past her, and while her gleam had thawed most of the water out temporarily, she knew as soon as she got close to the second half of the beach, things would get a lot more frigid and treacherous. Amelia darted through the water like a torpedo, swimming farther out from the shore to have more depth and space to avoid her foe, even though that hadn't helped on the previous runs. She had a thought on loop in her mind. It wasn't Goggins' message about your mind giving up before your body does, or Jake's new mantra that the Mavericks get back up. Her inspiring line—
I actually do like that saying, and that would make a damn good shot—
was, what would Mythil do? An upper-year student, Parvel Markopoulos, had been telling the students a legend from his world, a world full of gods and monsters. A mythic hero called Mythil had teamed up with a skinny little mortal to take on the fiercest gods and monsters in their world to save it from a tyrannical deity called Tarsa. Mythil had a lust to fight and smash things just like Amelia in her other form, but Mythil had channeled that desire into fighting those in her world who sought to control the innocent and make her world a worse place. On top of that, Mythil never gave up. Even after getting trounced in her first encounter with Tarsa, she'd prepared to go another round with the cruel goddess.
That is true.
Amelia wasn't going to give up either. She would be the second student to reach the end, and she'd do it without Jake's help. The water around her started getting more and more frigid, and crystals started to form around her. She could see her gleam rapidly approaching with a swirl of bubbles spinning around it and freezing in a twister of ice. She was tempted to clench her fists for a fight, but knew she needed all the propulsion she could muster. Mythil wouldn't quit, even if an enemy had beaten her before, Amelia said in her head. As her foe thrust its 3-clawed fingers towards her, Amelia turned and darted for the surface. She could feel the water beneath her freezing as a beam passed under her, but she rocketed up through the water at a 45-degree angle and burst out into the sky. She soared far enough that she was sure by the time she crashed back down, she'd be long past her foe with a clear run to the end. Even if she wasn't, her fists were ready to get swinging. She crashed back down into the water, swirled in chunks of ice and slush. She looked back and could barely see the rough silhouette of her foe behind her. She moved on forward ecstatically, but only for a few dozen feet before the water got denser and denser. Amelia felt chunks of ice freezing her limbs solid again. She thrashed her arms and legs trying to free them. She felt herself breaking away some of the ice, but more formed immediately after. Unless she went farther into her freak form, she wasn't getting away. She could see the gleam approaching her to grab her again. She wanted to go full freak so badly. She'd controlled it once before, if only briefly, but maybe this time she could keep control for good. The gleam got closer, a claw reached for her frozen leg,
slowly,
and she couldn't do it. Her body froze over, and she was grabbed once again to be dragged back to the starting line.
That's understandable. I mean, hey, at least you're thinking like, well, you're thinking you can do it, and that's a good mindset. So you can do it.
Amelia was dragged onto the shore of the starting line again. Then her semi-humanoid frigid gleam stuck a hand near her frozen chest and thawed her out. As soon as Amelia's arm was free, she swung it to grab the gleam, but as usual, it teleported back to the end before she could touch it. She was about to pound her fists into the dirt when she heard more cheering from her class scattering the beach. Zenith and Jake were both pumping their fists across the finish line. They teamed up just after Jake had gotten Anna across, and it looked like that had worked again. Now, only 4 students remained on the field. At best,
4 students, 4 gleams.
Amelia could come in 4th. She loved her class, but Amelia was ravenously competitive. She'd come to this school both hoping to learn to control her abilities, but also desperate for a rival. She thought she'd found one in Anna. They had tons in common, but also different enough powers to keep it interesting. Amelia's freak form was fish-like, and Anna perpetually had scales and gills like a fish. They'd both faced villains prior to coming to the school, though because of her freak form's difficult-to-control nature, Amelia had occasionally been a villain by accident herself. Anna even had a crystal stuck in her body too, though Amelia's had come from a crystalline hero who'd put an end to one of her rampages back in her world after she'd gone full freak. Jake and Anna's crystals actually gave them their powers. Amelia's had merged with her biology enough that it did grow and transform when she did, but it wasn't really part of her abilities. She was frustrated by another defeat, but about to leap
it's kind of like an add-on then.
Into the water once again, blindly charging in for another round, when someone stopped her. Getting tired of flopping? Maybe we should try a team-up too, huh, Monstrosity? Amelia turned and saw Darwin holding out a hand to help her up. A Pachycephalosaurus grunted angrily behind him, seeming to express the same emotions she was feeling. She took Darwin's hand and got up. Their class was small, so everyone knew each other well, but she hadn't had much in the way of one-on-one conversations with Darwin. In fact, from afar, she still occasionally mistook him for Jake, as they looked kind of similar and both often wore green. Amelia looked him up and down. He had some
Yeah, I mean, they all both brown-haired, brown-eyed, white male characters with seemingly obsessing for the color green. Though with Jake, that's a bit more because of his power set. And this guy, just because it's the Jurassic symbol. Jurassic Park logo, I mean.
Saliva on him from his own gleam, who'd brought him back to the starting line in its mouth multiple times. Do you really think that's smart? Not to sound cocky, but I believe I have the toughest gleam of us all. It's smaller than Sam, but could turn you into a popsicle in seconds. He crossed his arms. Mine's tough too. It can transform into even more dinosaurs and prehistoric creatures than I can summon. But I bet you could take it down with your strength. Plus, Voorhees is pretty big. If I summon him to block ice for you and we stay farther up the beach on land, it could make it harder for your gleam to freeze you. Amelia looked down the beach, seeing Anna, Jake, and Zenith cheering on Kiko, as she was getting closer to the end than she had before. Even if Amelia and Darwin did reach the end together before Kiko, then Amelia's victory would be even less impressive, having made it with a partner. but still, she'd been asking herself what Mythil would do, and even Mythil had teamed up with a skinny little mortal with little physical strength of his own.
Exactly.
And Ordisfanimo from the story didn't even have a squad of prehistoric beasts backing him up. Maybe a team up.
And let's not forget, Aldous actually didn't have anything with him until he got the bow, which didn't happen until, like, the second part of the story, where they slayed a sun god.
Is what Mythil would do in this situation. Amelia nodded. Alright, let's do it. Darwin pumped his fists and jumped up and down, tucking his knees to his chest, like he was overly hyped up. Amelia dug the energy level. He put his palm on his current dinosaur ally's chin, and his hand started to glow purple. Thanks, Quixote. Take a nap, buddy, old pal. In a sort of disturbing, but equally cool way, the Pachycephalosaurus's skin and flesh slowly disappeared, leaving only a skeleton. Then, even that deteriorated, until all that was left was a piece of its jawbone, which Darwin stuck into his backpack. He grabbed a jagged sword off his belt and tore the blade.
Oh, that's how that walks.
From the hilt. Let's try this again, Voorhees. Clutching the claw, more purple light swelled around Darwin's hands. Bones grew from the claw, forming...
Okay, now get his power. As long as he has any kind of bone of the prehistoric creature, he can pretty much call whatever had that bone back into reality to walk with him. Even if it's just a little piece of a claw. Very clever, very useful.
A towering skeleton above Darwin. Muscle and flesh formed on it, followed by a wave of thick feathers. 2 more claws now matched the one that had made up Darwin's blade on that hand, and another 3 formed on the beast's other arm. Amelia had seen Darwin's Therizinosaurus before, but being so up close as he awakened it was an entirely cooler experience than just seeing it walk around.
Oh, completely.
When fully formed, the creature shook out its head, then shrieked, eyes leering down the beach at Darwin's enemy. The Gleam Metashima had transformed into what Amelia thought was a golden velociraptor, but in actuality it was a Utah raptor. As Darwin would tell you, velociraptors are much smaller than the ones commonly depicted in pop culture. She looked back up at Voorhees, impressed. That is pretty fantastic, but don't you have a flying dinosaur in your roster? Why not use that? First of all, common mistake, but if it flies, it's a flying reptile, not a dinosaur. True. Second, I don't want to get knocked out of the sky and splat like a pancake on the sand. I don't care if these things technically aren't allowed to seriously hurt us. If it makes a mistake and knocks me out of the sky, I'm toast. We don't all have crazy super strength like you do. Darwin clambered onto Voorhees' back. You want to ride or run? Your call. Riding does sound wicked, but since I haven't gotten a good hit on my Gleam yet, I want to get on ahead and take a few good swings at yours. Darwin nodded and Amelia took off down the beach, with Voorhees charging on behind her. With the amount she transformed, Amelia could run faster than the following dino, but she stayed at about its pace at first so that they could help each other out as soon as a gleam struck. And that wasn't far away. They'd moved to the highest part of the beach they could while still being in the course. Darwin's Gleam had shifted back into a Titanoboa, and was slithering across the sand towards them. Amelia's Gleam was sprinting along the sand a bit farther away, with snow trailing behind it. Amelia wasn't sure if Darwin's dino really could protect her from the Gleam Pagos, but she could at least take his Gleam down for the count. She saw his getting closer and couldn't wait anymore. Amelia let her freak form shift up her legs a little bit more and took off faster towards the snake. She wanted to leap at it, but knew she'd lose most ability to adapt in midair if it moved out of her path. She stayed on the ground and let the Gleam dictate what part of it she'd hit. The titanic snake raised its head to hiss, then thrust its maw towards her. That was what she was hoping for. She cocked back her crystalline fist, kicked slightly higher off the ground, and slammed down right onto the snake's snout. It smashed face first into the sand, hard enough to send a cloud of the stuff shooting out in a shockwave around her. It felt so good to finally land a solid hit. Amelia didn't let up either. She dove over the snake's head and wrapped her arms around its neck. She wasn't quite big enough to grip all the way around, but could still squeeze the beast hard. It kicked its...
All I can say is good luck with that, because if you don't know the size of a Titanoboa, that thing is massive as hell.
...head up out of the crater she'd made. She thought it'd try slamming her into the dirt, but instead, its neck started shifting and warping. It was transforming into another dinosaur. But whatever it became, she wasn't going to let it beat her. Amelia kept squeezing even as the giant snake's neck had almost disappeared, and bony protrusions dug into her stomach. It had become an ankylosaurus. She thought it may try to swing its tail at her, but instead, it lifted its legs up on one side and rolled onto its back. It pinned her into the sand. It didn't hurt with the level of durability she had from her partial freak form, but she also could barely move her arms to try and get it off.
Yeah, that's
it seemed like there was no way it'd move until it wanted to. To make things worse, Amelia suddenly started feeling the sand beneath her getting colder. She couldn't see it, but her gleam was close.
Oh, that's not good. We got a dino gleam and an ice gleam. I guess it's time for an ice age. Oh, bad joke, bad joke.
Come on, what would Mythil do? Amelia thought. She rubbed her arms farther into the sand. She then said out loud, "She'd lift this stupid thing even if she thought she couldn't." Amelia managed to turn her palms around to face up, dug her elbows into the ground, and lifted with every ounce of strength she had. The beast raised off the sand above her. She pushed her elbows off the ground next and lifted the entire thing into the air. She felt incredible. She'd never lifted something so heavy without going full freak. Unfortunately, with her vision clear of the beast on her, she saw her gleam, leaping right for her with a hand swirled in ice ready to freeze her once again.
Use the
gleam! She considered dropping the dino back down to block, but there was no need. A massive claw swiped at her gleam and smacked it across the beach. Voorhees shrieked at it, then raised a leg and kicked the Ankylosaurus off Amelia, knocking it onto its side in the sand. Darwin looked down from the dino's back. "That was awesome! You good, Amelia? Not too squished, are ya?" She kipped up off the ground, landing on her feet, and cheered. "I'm fantastic! But watch out!" She looked down the beach to see the Gleam Pagos was firing a beam of ice from its hands directly at Voorhees. The dinosaur ran to the side to avoid it, but the Gleam Pagos turned its aim with the movement. It started freezing Voorhees' side and one of his arms. If it got the dino's legs, he wouldn't be able to run. While she was distracted deciding what to do about her gleam, Amelia hadn't noticed that Darwin's gleam had gotten up. The clubbed tail of the Ankylosaurus swung for her. Luckily, she saw it in her peripheral vision just in time to throw up an arm and catch it. She was surprised by how lightly it swung. She was sure it could hit harder, but then she remembered what Goggins had said. These things weren't allowed to hurt them, at least not directly. Amelia's could freeze her because, while quite uncomfortable, it couldn't do serious damage to her. Her freak form was practically immune to cold temperatures, so she mostly was too when partially transformed.
That's good,
mainly being frozen
least.
Just restricted her movement. Darwin's creatures could be turned back into fossils and reawakened later without any damage done, so the Gleam Pagos freezing them was fine. Darwin couldn't be frozen himself, though, as that could cause serious frostbite damage.
He is only
human.
On
that theme, the transforming Gleam Metashima couldn't hit Amelia hard enough to do actual harm, hence the slow-moving swing and pinning her to the ground instead of really attacking. Even when the snake lunged for her, it very well could have just grabbed her in its mouth to carry her back to the start, or toss her aside to get to Darwin. Even still, each Gleam could still be a threat to any student. Amelia knew they could learn and adapt just like real-world foes. That was the point of facing them, to train for real-world scenarios.
Exactly.
If they were going to keep any advantage they had from teaming up, they had to end this quickly. Luckily, knowing she could lift Darwin's Gleam gave her an idea, though she'd need a little bit more strength to pull it off. She saw the Gleam Pagos freezing Voorhees more and more, and she felt driven enough to go more freak form than she had in ages. Amelia let her arms transform all the way up to her shoulders, and her legs all the way up to her waist. She even felt her teeth and jaws shifting. She could feel the other form compelling her to lose control, like a convincing voice swearing to her that she could only be safe if everything around her was destroyed.
Don't
but
Hulk
she ignored it.
Don't Hulk.
Or, more accurately, channeled it. She took the Ankylosaurus's tail in both claws and swung it around in a full circle. After 2 spins, she raised it over her head. As she did, she leapt up towards the Gleam Pagos. With a toothy grin, she smashed the dinosaur directly onto her own Gleam opponent.
Yes!
Once again, a shockwave of dirt exploded around her, even bigger than the last. She landed, still holding the tail, and pulled the dino off her Gleam. It was flat on its back in the sand, but looked up at her quickly, then leapt to its feet, aiming its hands to shoot more ice. With this much of her freak form active, Amelia knew she could handle a bit more cold. She let it hit her with a beam of ice as she spun the Ankylosaurus around again and used it like a bat. Her Gleam tried to evade, but it was too late. The Ankylosaurus smacked the Gleam Pagos farther down the beach. She spun the dinosaur around once more and hurled it in that same direction. It landed directly on her own Gleam, leaving them both disoriented, and with Amelia and Darwin having a significant lead towards the finish line.
Do it up,
Amelia
guys, you're
cracked
almost
Frost
down.
off her shoulder, then darted over to Voorhees, and used her crystalline arm to chip away chunks that had gotten over his upper leg. "Can he still run?" she asked, looking at Darwin, who was warming up his own cold hands. "Yeah, let's go!" Just as they were about to charge down the beach, the Gleam Metashima let out a bizarre shriek. They looked back and saw it transforming, but not on its own. It shifted into a Tyrannosaurus Rex, but with veins of ice shooting through it, making spikes emerge from its back and head. When it got up, they saw the Gleampagos was riding it. Together, they stomped down the beach towards Amelia and Darwin. From up
holy hell, the Gleams even teamed up!
To the side, they heard Goggins, who was doing laps running up and down the beach, yell, "Never said you kids couldn't team up, but also never said the Gleams couldn't either. Fight hard, stay hard."
Love it.
"We've still got a lead, let's go," Darwin yelled. Voorhees started running and Amelia followed behind, but kept looking back to see what else their new united foe had up its sleeve. The Gleampagos gripped the T-Rex's back, and more veins of ice shot across to its mouth. It spread its jaws wide and roared. As it did, dozens of snowballs shot out of it towards her. She and Voorhees separated so the projectiles would fly between them, but one struck Amelia's shoulder and instantly froze it solid. She then saw more of the balls were hitting Voorhees and freezing him over too. They were nearly two-thirds of the way down the beach, but Darwin and his dino weren't going to get much farther if they froze anymore. Plus, the unified Gleam was gaining on them. Amelia looked down the beach to see Jake, Anna, and Zenith all cheering for them to keep running. But that's not what Amelia wanted to do. That wasn't what Mythal would do. "Keep going, Darwin. Now that there's only one of them, it'll be a lot easier to slow down."
Oh, she's right.
Before he could react, she skidded to a halt, turned back, and ran right towards their opponent. Amelia was farther into her freak form than she'd been in ages and was controlling it just fine. She knew she could go farther. Plus, turning back to stay in the fight wasn't just for her. Jake had put Anna ahead of himself and let her get to the end while he was sent back to the start. Amelia thought that, at least farther into the story, that's exactly what Mythal would have done too. Amelia was killing two birds with one stone, or feeding two birds with one hand, as Headmistress Trismegistus preferred to say. Amelia was going to test her own strength and help a friend finish at the same time. She couldn't say for sure that that was the true Mythal move here, but it felt like the right Maverick move. The united Gleam snowballs aimed directly for her. Amelia could feel her body freezing over as she was struck, but she transformed more and more until she was in full freak form. Monstrosity had truly taken the field now. Every fiber of Amelia was screaming at her that everything in her environment was a threat that needed to be destroyed. She couldn't change that feeling, but she could direct it where to strike first.
Yes,
she ran through the icy blasts, breaking away every bit that stuck to her, with her now full strength. She bounded off the ground, raised back a fist, and hammered it directly into the chest of the frigid Tyrannosaurus. The punch hit so hard that the beast flew off its feet and soared backwards, crashing into a stone pillar jutting from the sand. It got back up quickly, but was clearly not expecting a blow so hard. The Gleampagos on its back started freezing an icy club to the end of its tail, but before that was even close to done, Amelia had charged up next to it, gotten beneath it, and swung her fist straight up. She struck it under the chin and sent it soaring 30 feet into the air. It spun through the sky, but before falling back down, it transformed into an icy pterodactyl and shrieked in her direction, sending a beam of ice right for her. She held up her crystalline arm and the ice started building around it, and kept the blast from hitting her body. She essentially built up an icy shield larger than herself, before she felt the beam stop. She lowered the shield stuck to her hand and saw the Gleam getting struck by another flying reptile. Darwin was on the back of his Thalassodromius, which he called Panther. His own beast had snatched the Gleampagos off the pterodactyl's back and hurled it into the water. Darwin called down to her. "This is a team-up, remember? I'm not finishing without you. And if you can go full freak form, I guess I can try something that freaks me out too. But if I get knocked off, you better catch me before I splat." Amelia grunted eagerly, cracked the icy shield off her arm, and hurled it right into the stomach of the pterodactyl Gleam. It smashed into the beast and sent it tumbling towards the ground. Still ravenous to hit things in her freak form, Amelia leapt into the air, caught the Gleam Metashima by the beak, and whipped her body around in a circle. She hurled the beast straight into the sand, creating one shockwave, then clapped her hands as hard as she could above her to propel her downwards. She turned, raised an arm, and punched as hard as she could into the beast's back, sending a second shockwave that blasted across the entire beach. Amelia stood on the Gleam's back with an immense sense of satisfaction, but also realized her drive to destroy things wasn't controlling her. The urge was there, but it seemed like it had at least been sated enough by smashing this Gleam that Amelia, at least temporarily, had control. She quickly shifted back into her half-freak form and felt even more control come back. That fight and conscious transformation felt like a bigger achievement than reaching the end would. Though, she still wanted to do that too. She saw Darwin swooping down towards her, and she jumped up into the air to meet him. Panther grabbed her arm in its claw and soared down towards the finish line. The Gleam Metashima got up and started chasing them, and the Gleam Pagos fired ice at them from the water, but there was no stopping them now. They soared past the finish line and dropped down into the sand, cheering. They hugged and laughed as Jake, Anna, and Zenith ran over to join their celebration. As they went on to root for their other remaining 2 classmates, Amelia had an ecstatic sense that if Mythil had seen that, she would have been pretty impressed. And little did Amelia know, by agreeing to help Jake and the others take down Eloise Ludum, she'd actually given herself a chance to work alongside a descendant of her hero very soon.
I knew it! I knew it! I knew it! I knew it! Mythil and Aldous have kids! Okay, I remember that at like the end of the series is when it was all being revealed. There was a story being told at the academy, and how Ares has said and that them and their kids are doing pretty well. I remember.
I didn't realize when I brought back Illustrator Reacts recently that it was going to inspire me to level up my art, but I probably wouldn't have gone for that epic impact piece if it hadn't been for me talking about impact and movement effects in manga in the last Illustrator Reacts episode. If you haven't checked out my new rebooted version of Illustrator Reacts, the series that got this channel to be
difficult to do, not impossible,
my full-time job in the first place, but I stopped making about 5 years ago, you might want to check out the new episodes. I'm really happy with the new version of it. And I think it's also helping inspire me to make Trismegistus Academy a little bit different in terms of the ratio of art to storytelling. Like, I'm going to make the episodes a little bit shorter and increase the amount of art. Because as much as I love how Vigilance turned out, and I really like how the book version of Mythil Lethal is turning out, but I want my books to have a higher ratio of art to storytelling. More art per chapter. And I'm excited to be inspired by more stuff in the Illustrator React series. Anyway, besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note. And the thought I want to leave people with today is a quote I read this week from Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "Faith is taking the first step even when you can't see the full staircase." Sometimes even if you don't know exactly where you're going with a certain goal, you gotta just start moving in the direction that you think you need to be going. And trust that you're gonna figure things out along the way. I hope that's inspiring. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Friday. Goodbye.
Alright everyone, well that's going to be the end of today's video, and I hope you all enjoyed this. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Link to the original will be in the description below, and I'll see all of y'all next time when we flick back on. Until then, this is Fox, signing out. Peace.